Hi, thank you so much for clicking on our webinar series. This one particularly resonates with me, having been on my own mental health and wellbeing journey over the past sort of 12 to 18 months. The webinar series looks to try and answer those key questions that are going through your head at the moment by connecting you up with thought leaders in their space. It's a series that we run every month. We've got amazing topics coming up over the next few months, which I'll share at the end of this clip. I hope you enjoy it. If you've got any thoughts, comments, we'd love to hear it. And equally, any topics that you'd love to hear more about, please do share them with us.
So for those new faces who don't know me or LaFosse, my name is George Davies. I head up LaFosse's change and transformation practice. We support senior change executives from diverse backgrounds, industries and organisations to deliver complex change through building high-performing and sustainable capabilities. Joining to me today is the awesome Charles Ewen. Charlie, I'll let you share a little bit more about you and what you're up to at the moment.
Thanks, George. So hello, everybody, and thank you for taking the time to chat about mental health. My name's Charlie Ewen. I'm currently the Director of Technology at the Met Office. I'm the CDIO there, and I've been there for about 13 years. Prior to those 13 years, I had a variety of roles in industry, in the private sector, largely what I now retrospectively recognise to be what we now call digital transformation. So large-scale transformation driven by science and technology, essentially. I'm of a vintage that those words didn't exist when I was doing it, so it was called all kinds of things, but not that. And a lot of that involved things like mergers and acquisitions. It was in technology-based, in a very acquisitive, high-growth kind of environment. So, if you like, taking on transformational change of one kind or another has been a perennial part of my career. So looking at the Met Office, I'll probably come to why I joined the Met Office in a sec. But it was a bit of an unexpected move 13 years ago, driven by all manner of things that were going on at the time. But I came there at a relatively low-level role compared to what I've been used to. I succumbed to the temptation of climbing up the ladder once again, and ended up as an executive and board director there. And right now, I am delivering a £1.2 billion GMPP. Sorry, for those government major project or programme. It just means that it's a subset of government initiatives that are overseen directly by Cabinet Office and Treasury to deliver a new class of supercomputing, firstly to the Met Office, but ultimately to the world, in partnership with Microsoft. And that's big change all over the place, technologically and in other ways. So that's me, and I'm just hoping there's going to be some intriguing questions that put me on my mettle a little bit to try and talk a little bit about mental health. George, thanks.
I'm sure there will be. I guess I don't need to explain the value, the importance of our own mental health. You know, I guess if those who aren't here perhaps don't necessarily understand it, or nor do they have the time to look at their mental health from a different perspective. I think it's fair to say there's definitely been an opening, and people are more willing and open about talking about their mental health as well as the mental health of others. And one of the key reasons why I was really keen to sort of have this webinar is I think for many of the people on here, you'll all be senior leaders or leading others. And I think it's really important that as leaders, we all have the tools to be able to identify as well as support those within our teams who perhaps struggling with their mental health throughout their time, so that we can best support them. So Charlie, my sort of opening question to you, it'd be really great if you could sort of talk us through your sort of mental well-being / health journey. What happened to you? How did it happen? And what's it meant for you?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I didn't even know mental health was a thing, if I'm being honest. I come from a family of 5. I was born on a pig farm in Devon, a very stolid upbringing that was very forthright and simple, and mental health just wasn't a conversation, if I'm being honest. That said, I have fantastic parents. They recognise we're all different. We didn't question that too much. So just almost an idyllic and perfect upbringing with the best parenting you can imagine. So I set out in life having made a few mistakes. I got expelled from school when I was younger. I was academically pretty good. Thought I was better than I was, and kind of fought my way through school. Managed to get expelled. And that was probably the first time that I thought, that was the first big hiccup I'd had in life, really. I played a lot of sport at a reasonably successful level, rugby, cricket and athletics. So, you know, that kind of person, if you like, and found achievement actually quite easy. So getting expelled from school and realising I wasn't able to go to university to do physics, which is what I'd always wanted to do, was a big setback. And I didn't realise at the time, it's only with retrospective reflection, really, that I've realised what a big deal that was. But nonetheless, I fought on. I managed to get into an apprenticeship, degree level apprenticeship with the military, with the RAF, to do electronic systems engineering, which is what I wanted to do, and started a career there. Faced reality one day and decided that engineering was really hard work, and at the time was very badly paid. This is in the late 80s and early 90s, and engineering was very badly paid in those days. And so decided that I was going to move on from direct engineering roles, if you like, into leadership and management. And I did that by joining what was at the time a small parochial UK company called Farnell that were based up in Leeds. And that happened to happen at the same time that the internet happened, essentially. And so, without going into it too much, because we're all familiar with Amazon these days, back in those days, before the internet was really a thing, it was all brand new in the ways that you could take an organization that whose job it was, and hopefully some of you where you might remember color catalogs and call centers. So you look through these color catalogs and you selected your merchandise, and then you called a call center to make an order. That was the way it used to work then. You can just imagine, without being in that business, that the cost base is pretty high in that kind of model. And the internet changes the game with which you can have discovery and self-service online, and therefore reduce the cost to operate significantly, increase profits and so on. So the company, and ultimately the group of companies, because they grew rapidly via acquisition and organically, were first in the UK, certainly, and probably ahead of, well, definitely were ahead of Amazon back in the day, to latch on to that as a repeatable pattern. So we were buying companies, we were looking at whether they were suited for essentially high volumes of low value products that could be discovered electronically and then shipped online. And we did that a lot. And that involved, well, it essentially involved eventually making an American group of shareholders very rich, is what it involved. And for me, it involved an awful lot of hard work, because although it's easy to point backwards and we all recognize what happened at the time, just like with machine learning right now, it was really breaking into new frontiers. So I had a really good time for a while, I don't know, 10 years or so, arguably. And then two things happened almost at the same time. One, I've always been a little odd, and I was about 42, something like that, when I was in a meeting and there were observers. That wasn't unusual. I'm sure you're familiar with the observer thing, where people are sat around the outside. You know who they are, but you just accept they're there for a reason. And one of them asked to speak to me afterwards and essentially explained to me that I wasn't neurotypical. I won't go into that in any detail, but that was a kind of bit of a moment for me, actually. I'm still to this day not sure whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. I've always been aware of my attributes, which are, you know, I'm a good dot joiner, I'm good at strategy, I'm good at thinking forwards and so on. Not so good at other things like personal interaction or knowing how to politically manage people, if you like to characterize those things. But that was definitely a thing. And what that really started was a bit of introspection. And over the course of the next couple of years, I really fell out of love with my life. Very much, despite having a fantastic wife, fantastic family, I just fell out of love with life. And I was getting up in the morning with no purpose, no drive, no nothing. And because I have got a great family, although mental health wasn't the conversation we had, it was about why is Charlie so unhappy, and testament to the fantastic nature of my family. My wife said, "Well, I think it's your job. You know, why do you do this?" Because frankly, it got to the point where I wasn't really learning anything new. It was rinse and repeat type work by then. That's underestimated, but nonetheless, it really was. And the only purpose I had, I don't know if any of you are a fan of a chap called Daniel Pink, but he's done quite a lot of Uber analysis of research and comes up with 3 fundamental reasons for motivation. One of those is purpose. And so essentially I came to the conclusion that I just lacked a bit of purpose. And so then I decided something was going to change. And as these things take, it took a year or so to find the right thing. And it was another happenstance whereby an old boss of mine was working for the Met Office, and he said, "Do you fancy a bit of this?" I had a look, and the decision I had to make was, bear in mind at 43, big mortgage, young kids, take a 2/3 pay cut to do something that I actually believed in, or stay there and probably retire 20 years earlier or something, with lack of purpose. And I was so unhappy at the time, which I now, with a bit more education, a bit more life experience, realise it was quite a significant mental health event. I was so unhappy that I was prepared to do pretty much anything. I was considering a lot worse. I won't go into that dark side of things, but I was definitely considering worse. So in the scheme of things, that happened. I went to the Met Office, and to cut a very long story short, I found purpose. I'm not ever going to be rich, and I'm not going to be able to afford to retire until I drop. But I found a great deal of purpose and a couple of other attributes that Pink mentioned coincidentally along the way. Now, I'm not a medical professional, and I'm here to talk about my personal experience. So let's be clear, and let's be clear that in the scheme of what other people have experienced, this is nothing. I fully get that. But that was a real awakening moment for me. That I think the question was vaguely, how did you become aware of mental health and what's your journey around it? That was the seminal event. It was that 2 or 3 year period whereby I fell out of love with life to the extent that I just didn't know what to do. I couldn't get out of bed in the mornings. I had no motivation whatsoever. I was present but not at work. Still performing pretty well because I was pretty good at it, and it was rinse and repeat. So it wasn't that hard. And how the distinction between, once I come to terms with not being able to drive a new car, took a while. The difference in my life from that point onwards is really, really palpable. So I point to it as, if you like, an awareness of the importance of mental health, and lots of other things I could talk about the way. But George, that's probably more than enough to try and characterise the big picture.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, we've known each other for what, close to sort of 4 years or so, Charlie, now, and I think it was only recently that we sort of you shared that with me, shared your experience, shared your story with me. So it's really interesting. And if I reflect back on my own sort of my own sort of journey and challenges that I've had more recently, 12 months ago, I was very close to burnout. And it was only really when I saw there was a post on LinkedIn that sort of said the 12 stages of burnout. And I was scrolling through LinkedIn as you do, and I got caught by it. And that was kind of my light bulb moment. And out of the 12 stages, I think I sort of the 11th stage, it sort of resonated with me. And it was that moment I was like, right, I've got to do something about this, and I've got to think about it. And for me, I'm a great believer in, you want to change yourself, you've got to, one of the easiest ways to change things is to change your environment. So I said to Flo, my partner, right, next week we're off, and that was starting to try and break that cycle. But it certainly seems from others that I've spoken to that it often kind of boils down to one sort of key moment that you realize, and it catches up with you. And it might have been a couple of years, couple of months that it's been sort of building, festering, but it takes that one sort of moment to sort of uncover it. And so, Charlie, I guess thinking back now, and hindsight's a great thing. How could you have sort of prevented yourself from getting into that situation? Do you think you could have done, or do you think that was kind of inevitable part of your journey and the work that you've been up to?
Yeah, I do think I could have done something about it, and that's the reason I brought up the Pink motivation model. Is a slightly more sophisticated understanding of what makes us all tick to some degree, but certainly makes me tick. And if I'd have recognised that the purpose was the thing that was lacking, I mean, I did wonder. I do a load of volunteering. I always have done, and I wondered why I look forward to going out and helping at the cricket club to mow the grass more than I did anything that I ever did at work. So I should have figured it out, really. But I think the purpose thing, for me at least, is super important. And I think the things that I could have done differently was really, if you like, stopped maximising money, which is kind of what I was doing. And probably even if I'd looked around inside that organisation and looked for a different role or a change or something that was a bit more compelling for me at the time, and really allowed the, if you like, the heart or the emotional side of me to rule the head or the rational side of me. Because I'm like I am, I tend to be very data driven, let's say, to a point. People call me Spock sometimes, but data driven. But there are times when the whole, it's not just mental health. I mean, I could analyze it to physical health. I've done an awful lot of sport in my time, and there are some times when you just don't feel right. And when you don't feel right, you don't go to the gym and pound yourself out. You give yourself a little bit of a break, and you recognize these things. And I've never really been, well, again, it is associated with my neurotype. I'm not great at listening to that emotional part of me. I want to rationalize all of that and come up with data points, and I think that's really tricky to do. with mental health. I think only you know. It's unseen, right? If you've broken your leg, it's quite obvious you've got a big physical injury, or you're laid down with some malady. Mental health's different. Only you know, and kind of you expect the world to change around you, but that's never going to happen because people don't know. Why would they know? So you've got some options. You tell people, talk about things. I think that's some great tactics to do. But certainly, I could have done something. Sorry, very long answer, but I could have done something. And the thing would have been to listen more carefully to what effectively my body was telling me in a holistic sense, and not simply do the rational, do the obvious, do the thing that was so easy to be, the obvious thing to do to friends and families and colleagues and so on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more, and I think that's partly the journey that I've been on over the past sort of 12 months is actually like understanding myself. And it sounds very sort of grandiose, but I think it's really important, particularly as for many of the people on the call being change people. I can't see how you can change others without being able to change yourself or look inwards first. And I, similar to you, Charlie, I love what I do. I'm really passionate about what I do, and sometimes that can catch up with me because I'm really keen, and you kind of put those things on the back burner. When I'm not feeling great, I push on and I keep going, and I think that's something that I've had to learn, is to go, okay, right, well, actually, I'm not feeling great Friday. I'm really tired. I'm not going to try and burn the candle at both ends, and I'm just going to actually put back into my to myself. So I guess building upon that, Charlie, are there any things that you any tools that you use, any things that you do to give you that opportunity? Because whilst I'd imagine, as you touched upon, your role at the Met Office perhaps is a little bit less stressful than the other role, but you're leading a massive program. It's a headline government initiative with a massive impact. That stress, that pressure is inevitably still going to be there. How do you deal with that now on a daily, weekly, monthly basis?
Well, let me first put that into perspective. I'm not a medical professional, clearly, and in the scheme of things, the challenges that I've had have been nothing compared to what other people go through. So let me just say that. So this is based on my personal experience. So it's at the low end of things. Even my big issue, if you like, I didn't have to, fortunately, get any medical help or external intervention. They're all things. So bear that in mind when I talk about this. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, day to day, certainly, whether it's a COVID thing, whether it's an age thing, whether it's a stress thing, I don't know. But this brain fog phenomenon that seems to have come along post-COVID that people talk about, I do get that for sure. And I get it for extended period of times. I have no idea why, whether I've got something wrong with my immune system these days or whatever. I don't know. But there are certainly times when, for example, I'll get up on a Monday, I'll look at my diary and think, I just can't do that this week. And I didn't know that I could have, I just didn't know. So a thing that I definitely do is do my absolute best to recognize that. Somebody said in the chat, absolutely, self-awareness, that's the thing. I can't do that. I know that's beyond my means this week. What can I do differently? And I'll do that certainly ahead of having to take some time off sick, which I don't recall that I've ever done for mental health reasons. Not that that's a badge to wear, but just to, again, illustrate the fact that I'm on one end of a very big spectrum, which is, at the modest end. But yeah, my diary, I don't let my diary rule me, in other words. And there is always something in that diary that can go, always something that can go. So rather than lose a day or lose a week or take time off, it's, I'm not feeling as I should at the moment. And there are some things here, and they might be situational. They might be specific events that you don't feel able to stand up in front of 2,000 people and come on, let's go over the wall today. That might be an event thing, or it might just be a volume thing. So one of the things that I've learned is no matter how many private secretaries, PAs, assistants, teams that I've got telling me I've got to do things, I take control of that. And if it doesn't look manageable, then it isn't manageable. And it's a bit like, I mentioned sport, and I've had a lot of physical injuries, trauma injuries over the years. The analogy would be, you'd just be crazy to try and play rugby on a sprained ankle. The thing with a sprained ankle is it's visible. You can see it, others can see it. It's much more tangible. But you wouldn't, if you consider stretch the metaphor a bit, and you consider the day's week to be some high performance thing, you wouldn't expect to go out and play rugby with a sprained ankle. Why would you expect to go through an agenda that had been set ahead of you when you're just not feeling up to it? So that would be the biggest thing, actually, which is why I stress it, is that we've all, doesn't matter what level we're at, there's all more flexibility in our in our life than we tend to think, where we all tend to be more self-driven than outside-driven. And there are always opportunities. Not feel bad about yourself even if it's having a longer lunch break, even if we were great at this during COVID. Everyone was great at this during COVID, and it seems to have gone in a heartbeat. Everybody was saying, have you taken a walk today? Have you had any exercise today? Have you done? And now it's, back on the treadmill, unfortunately. Seems to be the culture. But yeah, taking a bit of control, George, would be the smaller ways to do it. I mean, larger ways to do it. Some of the things that have worked for me, but I can't believe I'm saying this, by the way, as an ex-rugby player, cricketer, and all those big sports. But yoga really helps me. I do that a couple of times a week, and that really has taught me how to relax. And this is a technical thing. It doesn't help because I have a nice chat and I'm a bit more bendy than I was. Not that I am. It helps me because it's given me some techniques. And out of those techniques that it's given me, the most powerful one for sure is controlled breathing for me. So because I can use it anywhere, it's not overt. You can do that when I'm feeling a bit stressed about something. I can, as I am at the moment, I can take a deep breath, and that really helps. So yeah, all kinds of things. But that hopefully gives you an idea of some of the things that's a day-to-day type consideration.
Yeah, 100%. I think it's I think you raise a really good point about that breathing. And when you say to someone, I'm kind of learning how to breathe, or I'm focusing on breathing, it sounds like quite a strange thing to say, doesn't it? Because we're all doing it every day, but perhaps not to the right extent. And that's something that I've been personally focusing on as well, and trying to create those spaces, create those moments in the day. And I'm kind of one of those people that like quite a rigid structure, and everything in my diary is sort of planned out. And so what I've been trying to do more often is to make sure that throughout the day I've got those key sort of moments, even if it's just like 5 minutes, to get up, pause, breathe, go for a walk. And I personally find that sort of resets my sort of whole mindset, my productivity as well, massively.
One of the things I've done more recently that's just come to mind as you say that is plan for planning. So that's quite a formal thing. So I've trained my team that when something comes in, it's not just the meeting to do the outcome, it's the time available to prepare for that outcome. So plan for planning, plan for outcomes. And so I want an appointment in my diary that gives me the time to read that report, or to generate that report, or to do that analysis. And that's been quite a big a thing I've got increasingly better at, actually. And look, this makes it sound like I'm a work shy layabout and doesn't get any output. My productivity, for what it's worth, has definitely improved, both in terms of volume and quality. So this is not about take more time off, don't do as much work. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that what works for me probably wouldn't work for other people. But consciously thinking about how you manage your performance, not just physically, but also recognise there's a huge well-being, mental health aspect to that is really the point.
Yeah, no, I can agree more. And so talking about performance and sort of managing performance as a senior leader, sort of how do you approach mental health, mental well-being with those in your team, I guess against a frame of your own sort of journey? I'm sure there'll be some people on the call who haven't necessarily experienced what you or I have or maybe they have. How do you sort of approach that now with your team?
So again, I tend to be methodical, as you've probably tell by now, and certainly I buy into the Lencioni theory of teams, where trust is everything. Trust is absolutely everything. If you're trying to work in any kind of environment, at work or at home, and it lacks trust, then you can forget anything else in terms of moving towards high performing teams and outcomes. So a part of building trust is all about being vulnerable. And a part of being vulnerable is the ability to talk about this kind of stuff. Sorry to characterize it like that. But what I mean is, so what does that let me do methodologically? For example, in my joint team meetings, I meet with them as a team once a week, every week on Friday, as luck would have it. Half of that hour-long meeting is taken in check-ins, where we go around the room and they can talk about whatever they like, and they do. And sometimes that's professional stuff, but actually on average, more often it isn't. More often it's, Auntie Vera died, my mum's not very well, I'm doing a bit of caring at the moment, I'm sorry I'm a bit crap at the moment, but I'm not getting much sleep for whatever reason, whatever, that kind of stuff. And that I found that super uncomfortable to begin with. I am not a sharer, to be clear. Despite being here talking about this, I am not a sharer. And so started to become comfortable with doing that was a real big thing for me. It was actually something I nicked off somebody else. I don't pay any credit to it at all, but over time, we've been doing this for 3-4 years now, probably. It certainly predated COVID, and it took us through COVID. Again, others would look at that meeting and say, well, that wasn't a very outcome meeting. What a waste of money. You've got 10 expensive people together and you've spent half the time chatting about how well you are. I don't buy into that at all. If I measure that in gross productivity, I believe that the trust that plays a part in engendering genuinely leads us to be able to perform better as a team, just in the same way that I mean about organising diaries and taking adequate breaks and that kind of stuff. I can guarantee I measure this stuff absolutely, and my productivity has improved both in quality and in terms of volume. So I don't buy into it's a waste of time.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think it is the role of the senior leader to create that space, or any leader, for instance, to create that space so people can feel they can share what's going on in their world.
I didn't fully answer the question, did I? So beyond that, sorry, that was supposed to be an example. Sorry, I've forgotten what the question you asked. So I apply that principle in managing teams. That's the point. You can't sit down and check in with everybody every day. That would be unreasonable. What I do is, for those that I am monitoring the performance for, we run a process called moderation. You can imagine, civil servant, everything is as fair as it possibly can be, and so we don't just get to assess the performance of our staff and our teams. That goes through a moderation process where there's some check and challenge as to whether your view as their line manager or whatever, or thematic leader, is consistent with what everybody else sees, and we use 360s and all sorts. And in that process, I try to be a champion of context. I try to be a champion to make sure, and unfortunately, even in I can promise you the environment that I'm in is the best cultural environment I've ever seen, but nonetheless, there are times when you have to challenge and get people to think about the context that some of our people at times are trying to go through. Did you know that lady's mother died 6 months ago and she's really struggling with it? And I think it's super unfair not to take those things into account. By having done that more thoughtfully for quite a long period of time, and I don't do it for this reason, but one of the, if you like, unexpected outcomes of doing that has been the degree to which I've got very little churn in the people that work for me. Unwanted churn. There are times when it's the right time to move on, and that's the way it is. But people leaving unexpectedly, very, very, very little of that, and I'm pretty sure that that's as a function of that wider consideration of what performance actually means. In other words, if you've got a sprained ankle, you're not going to have a good game of rugby. And sorry to bring it back to that again, but you're just not. So it's kind of stupid to think that if you're not in the best, if not in the tip top of mental health and your well-being's at a good place, you're clearly not going to necessarily be a star performer. And if you recognise that and live with people over time, then over time those things get addressed, and you get better, and you have good days as well as bad days, and then they will go that extra mile every time for you because you've accommodated them when times weren't so great.
Yeah, completely agree. I'm conscious we've only got 15 minutes left, so I'm kind of keen to open it up to not just me asking questions, but if anyone else has got a question, please raise your hand, and let's go for some questions as well. Namisha, go for it.
Hi Charlie, how are you?
Good, thank you. In the scheme of things.
So my question's more to do with the role of the leader and supporting staff with mental health. So I joined the Cabinet Office a couple of months before the pandemic, and it was my first role in the civil service. And I think where I ended up spending most of my time was in taking care of my team as they dealt with back-to-back crises.
Yeah.
And there were times where I felt, and I don't know if others feel like this, the ask of a leader through the pandemic and Brexit and many other things was so much more pastoral than we'd ever imagined. And there were things that I just didn't feel I was equipped or trained to do. So a lot of it was learning on the job and going with my gut sense. But there were times where I just didn't have the answer, and I really struggled with not being able to help people because I didn't have the answer. I guess my question to you and even to others is, what sort of support, training have you gone through to help you deal with that? Because I don't think any of that's gone away. And I think the role of the leader is going to continue to increase in terms of what's expected of us. But how do you get those skills that you haven't necessarily learned? They're not technical.
Yeah, super good question. Well, obviously undertaking some training, right? So I've done some of that. But nonetheless, that doesn't make me a qualified doctor or qualified to say I think so. Spot the signs and that kind of stuff. What we have got is we've developed, and this was definitely accelerated over COVID, but we've persisted it past COVID, is quite a few communities of interest that are really active. And many of them are either professionals or have had proper professional training. So, for example, our first aider network, our mental first aider network is there. So I wouldn't try and take on something. I would literally, you know, have you thought about talking to these people? Or have you thought about accessing this? And again, super privileged working in the environment that I do, that both the civil service generally and certainly the Met Office particularly have really good support, more professional support and access to professional support that means that I don't have to try. And I do appreciate that's a real privilege, and that won't exist certainly in some of the smaller and private sector organisations. But in the public sector, one of the big privileges is being able to do that. And I'm certainly very, very conscious. In fact, you heard my caveat when I came on, not to ever confuse seeing a lot of people talking about this kind of stuff with being any kind of professional. And I'm always very careful to talk about my personal experience. And in fact, I've already said it, this probably won't help others. So I try and bring it up to the metaphorical. I try and bring it up to the, for example, I try and say, for me, this works, but it might not for you. The most important things we've already talked about, it's about recognition, both self-awareness and the confidence through trust to be able to even talk about it. Because frankly, unlike physical health, where it's kind of obvious if you have broken a leg, with mental health, unless people start talking about it, you just don't know. So I often get asked, you know, what do you look for? I mean, I look for any anomaly as I would anywhere else. So any anomaly, and I'm not just looking for mental health problems with that anomaly, I'm looking for anything that could be causing that anomaly. That's kind of my approach, is what's different about this person. And sometimes it's got nothing to do with mental health. But surprised it has. But yeah, I think it's an absolutely brilliant point. There is a line, I couldn't describe it, but there is a line between really a sincere and authentic desire to help somebody with erring into the space of not being qualified or trained to do so.
And I think even Charlie being okay with saying, actually, whilst I want to help you, I don't think I've got the skills or experience to help you. I don't think I can. I don't know how to help you. And then finding people the right
One
support.
thing I have done that might help others is in that context, exactly in that context, I have offered to be with them when they approach those people. I've done that a couple of times, and I've been surprised how many times they've said yes. It's not every time by any means, but certainly a couple of times they have. So I've sat through their training, so I've got some understanding of it, or their support at some level. I won't go into details because it'd be identifying, but you know, a couple of people, I've been through some really tough times, and I've been very aware of what support they're getting because they've asked me to sit in with them.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Debbie, I think you've got your hand up, if I'm right.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Charlie, George, everybody else. Charlie, I resonate an awful lot with what you've said, especially the early years of, you know, being younger and, you know, sort of for me, sort of dropping out of school early, and because, you know, I didn't want to be there, didn't like the environment, never recognizing that actually it was having an effect on me. I think in those, because I'm quite ancient, in those days, you know, you just didn't talk about feelings and, you know, depression or, you know, mental health. But I've learned an awful lot about myself, and I'm very clear about what I don't want to do, and I think that's always my starting point. You know, I love supporting and helping, but I think I've learned where I draw a line and say, actually, I'm not giving, not adding any value here, but actually starting to affect me. So I think I feel really sort of confident about myself. And one of touch on Namisha, what you were saying. I think one of the things for me is I think if you naturally want to help people, then that happens in the work or a personal environment, and people start to draw to, well, for me, I think I support a lot of people, and they sort of naturally draw to me, and I build up trust through that way. And I think once you build up that trust and that relationship, you start to see those kind of signs, and they may not be big signs or trigger points, but you kind of think, I think to myself, I just need to support this person, or check in an awful lot and take off some of that work, or you know, just have a coffee or whatever, and that works really, really well. But one of the things that I do or don't do well is I'm very good at sort of practicing what I talk about, but I don't actually apply it to myself. And what I know about myself is I then absorb a lot of other people's, you know, what they share with me, and then I find I don't have anywhere to go, and then and I'm definitely not good at saying, do you know what, I'm having a bad day today, or I will help you, but I can't do it right now. So I don't express myself very well. So in that sense, I don't look after myself. And that often sort of manifests itself in me just sort of saying, right, no meetings today, I don't want to talk to anybody, I'm just going to crack on with whatever I'm doing. And I just wondered if that's something that you might have experienced, and how do you overcome absorbing all of this and then making sure that you're then not negatively affected yourself by it?
Absolutely great. You sound an awful lot like my wife, by the way, who's a very empathetic, socially gifted, natural, helping person. Just to be clear, I'm not horrible, but I am not. So I am not. Because of my neurotype, I almost lack any empathy. I find it very difficult to be empathetic unless it's, from a feelings point of view. I really do. So that's an advantage for me, because I have to learn how to do these things systematically. I've mentioned it a few times. So this is just one aspect. How to walk into a room of people as a senior person and behave like I should is for me a learnt behaviour. And this is a learnt behaviour. So in my instance, maybe I'm really lucky, but it doesn't tend to rub off. It doesn't tend to. So I won't say I've got limitless capacity, but I do get it. I absolutely get it. And I think it's a quirk of my neurotype that, and possibly why I've systemized everything and got my little way of understanding it, a bit of a playbook, is because it doesn't come naturally to me. I'm not naturally empathetic, and I'm not naturally going to ask people how they are, but I've learned to do those things. That's kind of, it's good. Thanks for asking the question, because I'm pleased to be able to put that so clearly. Yeah.
I think as well, Debbie, to sort of add on that and sort of share my perspective, I can't agree with you more. I think you do take on a lot, and it's easy for that to sort of get a bit overwhelming. I remember one week I had like 4 people telling me that either their parents or their partner had just been diagnosed with cancer. And you're like, how do you respond to those sort of big events for people? And I think for me, it's about equally giving yourself the space and the time to process all of those things, and creating that sort of space for you to be able to understand it. I think equally, it can be lonely up at the top. 100%. Where do you turn as a senior leader to share what's going on? Because there is, whether we like it or not, there is a stigma when it comes to mental health. And as a CIO, you go up to a chief exec, unless you have a really good relationship, you're thinking, crying out loud, this person's going to be thinking, oh, can they continue with the project they've got? Are they going to be able to continue leading the team? Because it's a high pressure environment. So I think that's why having some of those sort of informal networks with your peers from across a range of industries, I think that's a really valuable thing to have, because you can share it with someone who equally understands what it's like operating within a high pressure environment. There's one thing going down the pub or wherever to decompress, but equally having those people who understand really well the job that you're doing and are probably going through exactly the same thing, I think that adds a huge amount of value. Michelle, I'm conscious you've got your hand up as well. Let's have one more quick question, because I'm conscious of everyone's time.
Mine was more of an observation, really, George. It's so I've got a little bit of Charlie, I've got a little bit of everyone, I think. And when you're seen as a senior leader, I'm working in a culture which is driven by fear, and everyone that I am have in my team come with that, that real protect. They want to protect themselves. They want to say yes to everything. And I'm like, you can't say yes to everything. So what I'm bringing to the party, I think, is a kind of, I've got boundaries. I'm really clear on what my boundaries are, and I'm very open and authentic. And even if it means that I end up, and George will know this, swearing on a call and being the authentic me, I expect people to be able to express themselves openly. But some of the situations I found myself in, it's a really good point around having a network outside. So the environment I've always worked in is you go to your senior leadership, you kind of look for coaching up. I don't anymore. I look for coaching out, because you can share that experience. You can get a different perspective, and it's a safe environment, because these people are going through exactly the same thing. They probably don't want to say anything either. So the network for me, and I've got I've got a business coach as well. It's having that safe space to go to, so that you're absorbing everything, but also being able to transfer that outside of the working environment, so that you don't get that sometimes weird dynamic perception where you go to a senior leader and say, I've got this problem, I go elsewhere, because that usually that person isn't going to solve it. They're going to look to somebody else to solve it for them. But yeah, just really good conversation, and really great to be part of this network. I'll be reaching out to people.
Couldn't agree more, Michelle. And you know, psychological safety, for us, is a big thing. And that's one of our core strategic outcomes for next year at the Met Office, to deliver this psychological safety. And you know, we're going through a lot of change. Everybody's going through a lot of change, but we're going through some extraordinary change at the moment. And in that a big part of that psychological safety is to be super authentic about what we don't know. So this is getting our people to be confident in times of uncertainty, and not trying to do, because when I did my first leadership thing, they used to explain it like, you've got to be the umbrella of certainty for your staff. They're going to see the world riddled with ambiguity. Your job is to make it simple for them. And I think that's changed considerably.
I agree.
I think the change is to have that authentic, honest, open, if you can, relationship, if you like, in a psychologically safe way, where you can have grown-up conversations about the intrinsic ambiguity that's around. You know, I could talk about machine learning, I could talk about the economy, I could talk about politics and elections. The point is that it doesn't matter how high up you are, it doesn't matter how senior you are, there's some of these things that, quite frankly, we haven't got Scooby-Doo. And we tend to try and use that language now, you know, really quite informal language, maybe not swearing, because maybe in my case too much, but the point is that try and make it clear that you're being really authentic, that just because you're the next rung up the ladder, or a few rungs up the ladder, doesn't mean to say that you're omnipotent and you've got the answers. And I'm afraid that's the world is. Doesn't make you unprofessional, doesn't make you bad at planning, doesn't make you bad at your job. It's just there are some intrinsic ambiguities out there, and trying to get people to be more comfortable with that, I think, is a really, really important part of well-being and the antithesis to getting into mental health problems.
No, I totally agree.
Well, I mean, it's definitely a conversation I'm sure that we could keep going for a long old time, but I think we're going to run out of time. I'm conscious people have other meetings to head to. I guess I was really keen to sort of share something with you before we do go. There's a lot that we don't know necessarily about mental health and the sort of the health side that sits behind it. Most people would have heard about cancer research, but less people have heard about a charity called MQ. They are effectively the cancer research for mental health. If you're interested in hearing a little bit more about what they do, I will follow up with a link to their website after this. And if you do have a little bit of money to be able to send their way to fund some vital research they're doing all around mental health, I'm sure they would really appreciate that. Charlie, look, if people want to learn a little bit more about the awesome work that you, as well as the team at the Met Office, are doing, how can they do so?
So firstly, if anyone knows anything about supercomputing, you're hired. Met Office, great website. I'm on LinkedIn, happy to try and engage. I'm not great with LinkedIn, I warn you now, but I'll do my best on that, and really happy to chat with anybody that wants to follow up.
Cool. Sounds good. Thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you have a great weekend once it arrives. And as our next webinar, just to let you know, is going to be all about vision setting. I think it's really important about how we set a vision and how we follow that vision. So again, I'll follow up after this with the details of that webinar. But thank you so much for joining us. Have a lovely weekend, and no doubt we'll speak soon.
I really hope you enjoyed this webinar, and if you're keen to join us at our next webinar called Unleash Your Vision, a Skill for the Modern World, we'd love to have you join us. Please click on the link that will be in the comments, where you'll find a booking page to secure your slot. It's going to be a really exciting one on the 7th of June at 12:30 again. Hopefully we'll see you there.